We'll do our usual prayer for teacher-student. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Jai Shri Rama. We say Jai Shri Rama because Rama, of course, the story of Rama. And just to remind you, Valmiki's Ramayana, the story of Rama, tells us about our own life. We may not be kings and queens and so on, but we do go through turmoils in life, sometimes up, sometimes down, and unexpected curveballs get thrown to us. So just to remind you, everything was going fine in Ayodhya. The population was happy. By their nature, they were happy anyway, because King Dasaratha had made sure that there was an ideal model kingdom there. A kingdom full of aesthetics, culture, beauty, justice, all the things you would expect in a well-administered capital. And Rama, the light of everybody's life, was there, about to become the Yugaraj, the designated king. And the coronation was supposed to be the following day, and that had to be changed radically. Radically, so radically that the whole population was in shock. And we know that what possessed Queen Kaikeyi was an element of jealousy, and that was infiltrated into her psyche. We can't blame her because we're all subject to this jealousy. We can, at any given moment, have a change of heart and change of mind, become distrustworthy of others, and think that we will gain some kind of advantage in our own life or the life of those we love. And that clouds over any idea of selflessness, any idea of what is for the common good, what we commonly call dharma. We'll recall that Rama was the embodiment of dharma. And what is dharma? That principle that keeps everything in harmony. And we know how discord can arise at any moment. In our contemporary life that we are living, we see disharmony everywhere. We see it in Africa, we see it in Europe. We see dangerous threats, particularly in the eastern part of Europe at the moment. And it alerts us, what is the difference between here and 7,000 years ago, the time of Rama? Well, the difference is we get communication more rapidly today, and multisensory communication. And if we are susceptible to that, then we experience some kind of difficulties, some traumas. How to combat these? So if the story of Rama has no practical application for us, then it doesn't seem much point studying it. It should have something that we can practically take away from us, even looking at heroic characters and seeing that they are human, and the human aspect of it is our own humanity that suffers all these ups and downs. And that we see that life is not just fleeting, but it can change in a flash. It can change. We are happy today and not happy tomorrow. We can see that suddenly something can happen. Maybe a loved one can suddenly die. Unexpectedly in an accident, for example, and create huge trauma for us. So we are faced now with this idea that from Queen Kaikeyi's poisoning of her mind, she insists that Rama, the apple of everybody's eye, goes off to the forest. And despite his remonstrations, Sita says, where Sita goes, Rama goes. I also will go. Immediately we find some heroism on the part of his wife and on the part of him. And Lakshmana says, I will also go. Where Ram goes, I will also go. And the last exhortation we have before their sojourn in the forest for 14 years now, their banishment from the kingdom. Of course, it is a conclusive thing, and the charioteer has taken them to the Guha, which is the chieftain. He's taken them across the river Ganga, and so on. We've studied this previously. Now, the interesting thing about Valmiki's story is his technique is familiar to us. If we watch films, we can watch there's a scene taking place in one area, let's say the forest, and we wonder what is happening back in Ayodhya. And the thing that strikes us is that the party of three realize that they are actually in the midst of very good fortune. What seems like a discord and a tragedy has opened their eyes because they see things in the forest that they never saw before. The beauty of nature. And they realize this 14 years is going to enrich us. It's not a tragedy. It's just the way we used to look at it. But the tragedy is back in Ayodhya because people are just confused, alarmed, disappointed. And when Sumandra, the charioteer, is going back, as he must do, and leaving and saying goodbye tearfully, then, of course, he's going into an area where everybody is thinking he will certainly bring them back. It's something like an unpleasant dream. We can hardly believe it. It's the nature of bereavement itself. First of all, we deny something, and then we feel guilty and angry and so on and so forth. We know this in terms of human bereavement. Every disappointment is something like a bereavement. So, what is the cause of our suffering? Expectation in the future. If we lived in this present moment, here and now, that expectation would be missing. And the anxiety that goes with it would also be missing. And our lives would be enriched. Now, Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana are living in the present moment, observing nature around them, and enriching their experience with a sense of appreciation and thankfulness. And they have left the memories behind. They have accepted their fate optimistically. But that is not the case in Ayodhya. In Ayodhya, they are full of these expectations, so that when Sumantra returns, he finds a whole population expecting them to bring them back, rubbing their eyes, thinking this is an incredible dream, can it be real? And so for a long time after Rama had crossed the Ganga, the Guha, and Sumantra stood on the bank of the river, this old charioteer or chariot driver stood gazing after the princess and Sita, like one who watched a bad dream. We can understand the state in which he is. And bemused, expecting to awaken from it at any moment. That is his condition, and its condition when he returns to Ayodhya. So it was near around about noon, says Valmiki, the following day after they have departed and gone into the density of the forest. And Sumantra has bade farewell to the faithful chieftain Guha, who offered, you can stay here all 14 years, you can stay with me. But in the spirit of truthfulness, they said, that's not in the spirit of our banishment. So let us go into the forest. And we will carry out our commitment to be banished on our side. Because it's a question of honor. It's a question of carrying out their father's words. And you see the alignment of truth is absolutely impeccable. So Sumantra bids farewell. he yokes his horses and he drives back to Ayodhya. And it took him 3 days and nights. He rides back. Now we can estimate a little bit the distance, something like 400 or 500 kilometers distance. If you take, for example, the average speed of a bicycle, and say you're traveling for 6 hours or something, giving your horses water and so on and so forth. So it's some way off. Anyway, he returns with his heart full of sorrow, and the 4th evening, when the sun had set, he arrives at the gates of Koshala's capital, Ayodhya, and nothing stirred in the city. It was all quiet. Normally there'd be some kind of crowd gathering. There might be sound of music in the air. There was nothing like this. There were no games of chess, the most ancient board game, which imitates the military strategies of the day. And there were no contests, no wrestling taking place, or marksmanship, all the common day activities which were there. And nothing happening in the alleyways. There were no ghee lamps being lit. Ayodhya was in darkness. There were no people strolling about, and silence hung over the city. You can see an atmosphere of depression amongst the whole population. And at the clatter of Sumantra's wheels, the people suddenly opened all their doors and came out to see maybe Rama himself has returned, in which case things are back to normal. They crowded the chariot. They cried, "Where is Rama? Where is Rama? Where is our Yuvaraja, Sumantra?" They're not accepting the situation. And the old chariot driver hangs his head and replies in a whisper, "See, I left him on the banks of the Ganga. He ordered me back to Ayodhya, and so I'm here." And so before the word had spread and he was mobbed, Sumantra snapped his reins and drove immediately off to Dasaratha's palace to give his report. And the women who were there in the palace, they saw him coming. And when they saw him come along alone, they went out and they turned back to their apartments, seeing Rama has not returned, Sita has not returned, Lakshmana has not returned. And so their hope turns to despair and they return to their apartments. And Dasaratha goes to Kausalya's chambers, that is Rama's mother. He kneels before his king Dasaratha, who is taking refuge in his wife's arms. And of course, Dasaratha is asking him questions. Where have you left them? How are they? Are they in good condition? What is their welfare? Can you give me some assurances about this? And Sumantra tells him, we drove south for 3 days, indicating the vast distance they traveled, and left him on the banks of the Ganga. And I myself watched him cross the river. And after waving to me, he walked into the forest with Lakshmana and Sita. That's the last I saw of them. I didn't see them anymore. And the king of hunters, Guha, the chieftain, he had news. He had some news because his trackers had followed the trio. And 3 days ago, the princess and Sita had arrived at the ashram of Bharadvaja. That's all I know. So I know that they're staying there. And we have to bear in mind that he also offered them a 14-year stay, and again, they refused. Anyway, as he spoke, Sumantra's gaze roved anxiously over his master, the king, Dasaratha, and he saw how Dasaratha had aged dramatically, how his physical appearance had changed. It's an indication of how stress and anxiety can affect every single part of our body. So it's a human story. Naturally, we would expect him to be distressed. And Valmiki certainly describes in great detail the king's difficulty. First of all, he'd grown very thin. And he might not have eaten at all since he had left him. His appetite had gone. And since Rama had left, his skin was pale. It hung loosely on his face, and tears leaked from his weary eyes, like his life. This is in vast contrast to the great king who ruled with an iron fist and with the generosity of spirit and with strength over the entire city, and was admired for his administration and his decision making and his prowess in battle. Now a very different scene was there. How this stress can destroy us all. What is our remedy if we pause there to reflect on it? Our remedy is to change, shift our thinking, and Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana have already done it. So the challenge is, can we meet up to the heroic take? Can we also use our capacity to transform discord into harmony? So the king was sighing, and with every word he heard and shivered, and as if with some great terror. And now when he spoke, his voice, which once rang out like thunder through his assembly, through his sabha, was barely audible. So he's basically given up life. 5 days, within 5 days, he died. Of what? He died of a broken heart. He died from emotional exhaustion. Anyway, he's still asking Sumantra, tell me more, so my pain grows a little less. If I'm given assurance that Rama is okay, my pain will be a little less. Though there's by now no cure for me, tell me how he walked into the jungle. Tell me how he slept while you were with him. Did he send a message for me? What did Sita and Lakshmana say? Tell me everything, Sumantra. Give me some peace. Now here, as I was reading this, it struck me that this is a highly meditative passage. Because what it means is there's a certain type of meditation where we can ask these very questions. Supposing our chosen ideal is historical. Supposing it is Jesus or Buddha. Supposing it is Rama, or supposing it is Krishna, or supposing it is Ramakrishna. Would we not ask, if he was present right here and now, how would he be walking? What would he be saying? And the Bhagavad Gita itself picks up this in terms of what are the characteristics of somebody of steady wisdom. Stita Pratnya, it's called. The question is asked, how does he talk? How does he walk? What food does he eat? Now we have the possibility of a meditation. Supposing you're a Christian, would it not be possible to think, supposing I'm walking with the Master by the Sea of Galilee, and he's hungry, what would we catch for him to eat? How would we cook it? What would we discuss while eating? What enlightening conversations will be ours? What precious words will fall from his lips? How will his face shine and look? How will we be captivated when we see his eyes as he speaks? What memory will we have of his sacred words? What practical lessons does he have for us? Will we be tempted to massage his feet, take the dust off? Will we wish to be with him, not depart from him? When he sleeps on the ground, under the stars, we sleeping next to him by a campfire, what will be our thought? How will we view our companionship? How much fortune will we think we have as we do this? And so we can also see that this becomes a great comfort, just on a superficial level now for Dasaratha. We can make it deeper. Anyway, Sumantra is telling, they wept, my lord, before they left me. Your sons rubbed their hair with the juice of the Nyagrodha tree and twisted their locks of jata on their heads. In other words, like ascetics. In other words, willing and literally taking their banishment seriously. Taking it with a sense of a spiritual exercise. And Dasaratha listened to this in silence, and he seemed to become absorbed in the images of Rama that arose in his mind. But abruptly he sat erect and tried to get up from his couch. And he couldn't. And he cries, take me to him, Sumantra. I cannot live without my child. Yoke your horses, take me to him now. And at his sides, the comforting queens, Kausalya and Sumitra, stroked his arms and tried to quieten him, though they also cried. So he's not accepting the situation, even now. And Sumantra stood before them in anguish. And the king clasped Kausalya's hands. Don't forget, Kausalya had not been attended to fully by the king up to now. So he asks her forgiveness. He says, "Forgive me, Kausalya, forgive me. Don't be angry. I couldn't bear that." We can see how tragedies that affect our life make us revise our relationships with others, maybe out of sense of guilt, maybe out of sense of shame, but certainly it should be out of a sense of love. So he asks for forgiveness. He knows his demise is soon. He says, "Though I betrayed your love, you have always been kind to me. And now, look what I have done. Forgive me." Again, he repeats it. And he sobs. He sobs like a heartbroken child, and Kausalya cradles Dasaratha's head against her. She caresses his face, saying, "There's nothing to forgive, my lord. If I have spoken harshly to you these past days," trying to persuade you to be more reasonable, "it's only from my own sorrow. We will share this grief and conquer it, and Rama will come back to us." So not only is she putting aside this aspect, there's nothing to forgive, but also putting something positive in, trying to change his mind. Rama will come back to us. It's not that he's lost to us. In 14 years, I'm sure he will come back. But by this time, Dasaratha, exhausted by his own emotion, he falls asleep. And for a while, the queen is holding him quietly. And suddenly his eyes flew open as if a demon has visited his swoon. And they darted here and there as if searching blindly for something. And then he sighs and shuts them once more. Clearly he is disturbed. And thus, with Kausalya's leave, Sumantra leaves Dasaratha. He bows low to the king that he has served for so many glorious years and backed out of that chamber. And now the king is ruminating because everything has a cause. So it is not just Kaikeyi. This is often some kind of theological dilemma. When something unfortunate happens, is it as simple as the queen got caught up with jealousy? Or is there something else afoot? Should we explore something else? Because one principle we know in life is there is some causality going on. What is the other causes for this drama unfolding? And we can see everything has multiple layers within it. So let us see what those are. He recalls, and he becomes quite clear at nighttime. And so from his restless slumber, he awakens. His two queens, Kausalya and Sumitra, sat beside him. You recall Kaikeyi, he wants nothing to do with. And so night was always a lucid time for him. And his mind seemed to clear when the darkness fell, and also so did his speech. So that night, he put his arms around Kausalya so she would hear what he had to say, and he shares something with him that she had never heard before. See, without Rama, he had no desire left to live in the bitter present, and the past started to call him irresistibly. It's a technique we all use. Is there something that I did myself to cause this? And so with this self-examination in mind, he could see Kausalya dimly in the dark, and he sees her as she had been many years ago, young, beautiful. And slowly but clearly he says to her, you see, here's what I think. Whatever a man does, good or evil, comes back to him someday. It's an inevitable law of sowing and reaping, we might say. And he prays for everything. And once when I was young and a keen hunter, I had a very strange adventure. I was an expert in Shabdavedi. What that means is I can go into a forest area with a hunting attitude. Instead of observing with my own eyes the object that I'm going to hunt, I have the skill of listening. And I listen, I can even close my eyes. And as I listen, I can hear the type of animal that is coming and the exact location and where my arrow should go to make the animal fall. And so he developed an expertise in this. It was a summer's end, and he says, I remember I can see the parched earth thirstily drinking the first showers of the monsoon. The sky was heavy with storm clouds, and the frogs on the swollen pools were giving throat all together to welcome the rain. In the conference I went to in Zinal in Switzerland, I told them the story, Why We Disagree. It was the second speech that Swami Vivekananda gave at the Parliament of Religions. And one person asked one of the days, I forgot what you said, you see, frogs in a well. And a frog from the ocean came in and said, the ocean is much bigger than your little well. And this frog kicked him out, basically. I forgot what that frog had said. And with a sense of fun, I said, oh, I think he said, oh, like that. Anyway, that's okay. So anyway, he hears these frogs and so on. All right. So Valmiki describes what Dasaratha is thinking. And so he is there in his own mind by the river Sarayu. A green mountain is there in front of him, and the river had risen and everything had been lashed clean by the torrents of the past day. Then he says, I stood very still, hidden in some thickets. I waited beside a pool on the river that was a favorite waterhole for the animals of the jungle. And for half an hour, I stood motionless, and there was no sound, except the songs of birds in the trees. Then I heard it. What did he hear? I heard it, like music to my ears, the long gurgling noise that elephants make as they drink through their trunks. And never looking out from where I was hidden, lest I give myself away if I move, even in the slightest way, I eased my arrow through an opening in the thicket, and tracking the sound only, with only my hearing, I drew back my bowstring and shot a fierce arrow at where I judged the elephant's heart to be. And instead of hearing the shrill trumpeting sound of an elephant, a noise I will not attempt this morning, of a wounded beast, I heard a scream that froze my heart. It was the scream not of an elephant, but of a man. Then a voice was raised in agony. Who has shot me like an animal? I am a rishi. Why am I hunted with arrows? Who are you, sinner? Come out, let me see you before I die. A very dangerous situation. As we know, a rishi's curse or angry words will have an indelible effect on the person he curses. But he says, I scrambled out in shock and saw a young sannyasi before me, fallen over on his side, and my arrow had pierced him right through and protruded evilly from his chest. Its feathers were stained with his blood, which gushed from him and fell on the white sand. And beside him lay his water pot, from which all the water had spilled. A legend of pain was in his eyes and anger. And when he saw me, he cried through the lips that frothed blood, O Kshatriya, O military person, what have I done to deserve your savage barb, the tip of the arrow? I came to the river to fetch water for my old parents, who are both blind, and now they would die without me, and thinking that I abandoned them. Not just one life you're affecting these old people's lives as well. And you can see the irony in this, that blindly the arrow was shot, and it has the effect on blind people. And as we know, blindness philosophically means ignorance. Anyway, his breath came in a tortured wheeze, and more blood bubbled from his mouth. And I fell sobbing at his feet. I told him how I came to shoot with my arrow, and I begged him not to curse me, to believe it had been a mistake, an honest mistake. I held him in my arms, and between painful gasps he said, "Fill the water pot and take it back to my father. You will find him a way down this trail." So, understanding the mistake, no curse was given. Tell him what happened, pacify him, and try to prevent him from cursing you. Because my curse I'm foregoing, but he may curse you. And as for me, I know you didn't mean to kill me, and I forgive you. We can see in this story the ultimate in purity and humility and truthfulness. You see, we can often say, "Oh, I can easily forgive," but then we say, "I can't forget." Well, that means you never forgave. If you didn't forget, you can't forgive. The effort of speaking drained him, and he lay quiet for a while, but I saw his eyes glaze over as death came for him. His face contorted in another spasm of agony, and he cried out, "Draw the arrow away from me," because the arrow is being used as a plug. "And let my life follow it. This pain is unbearable. I am dying too slowly." So lucid enough to understand the reality of it. And he smiled wanly at me, and his thin face was radiant and beautiful. Imagine if we all accept the Lord of Death that visits us from time to time. We don't know when, and we don't know where, but it'll visit. The angel of death will come. Will we also simply accept it in a philosophical way? Not only accept it, but welcome it. His face is radiant and beautiful. And I grasped the shaft of the arrow and, with a heave, pulled it dripping from him. And with one last scream that echoed through these woods, frightening the birds and the trees into flight, his eyes rolled upward, and he was dead in my arms. And now there was peace on his face, and his lips softened into a smile. And for a long time I stood stricken beside him. Then I picked up his water pot and filled it from the river, and summoning all my courage and on heavy feet that wanted to turn and run back to the comfort of the palace, I made my slow way along that dreadful path through the forest towards his father's ashram. He could have done it as a hit and run. He could have shot him, encountered this, and not gone back to the comfort of his palace. But with great strength of character and great purity of mind, he then carries out his promise. So he picks up the water pot, fills it from the river, and summoning, he says, "All my courage and on heavy feet that wanted to turn back." And I made my way slowly away along that dreadful path through the forest towards his father's ashram. And the father heard me before I saw him, and thinking I was his son returning with the water, hails me. And they sat at the door to their hut, two blind old people bent with age and poverty, and their eyes gazed sightlessly at me. And I stood silent before them. And the old Muni, because a Rishi is a Muni, somebody who is silent as well, said with some asperity, "Why are you standing there so quietly? Your mother is thirsty. Give her the water. Not give me the water, give her the water. This is not the time to be playful." And the king says, I took a deep breath and gave the water into the old woman's hands. Of course, he was a prince at that point, not a king. Then I said, "I am not your son. My name is Dasaratha, and I am a prince of the house of Ikshvaku." And I paused and moistened my lips that were dry as deserts, and they craned their heads to my voice. Somehow I went on, "I have bad news. I have caused you both great, great sorrow. What I have done is unforgivable, but I didn't do it on purpose, and I beg you to forgive me. What have you done, Kshatriya? And I told them as best as I could how the water pot being filled had sounded like an elephant drinking, and how I shot my arrow without looking. And the rishi and his wife received my news with grave calm, and they were obviously master and mistress of their own emotions. How do we master our own emotions? Through long practice. Because if you want a contest between intellect and feeling, feeling will always win. We have to take our assembly of energy that we call feelings and steer it in a positive, fruitful direction, something that will elevate our own sense of spirit. So slowly the old man said, if you had not come here with such courage, my curse would have burst your head from afar like a melon. Take us to our son. We want to touch him one last time with our fingers, which for us will be our eyes. And in misery I led them by their wizened hands down the path of sorrow, and kneeling in the wet sand, the father stroked his son's face and wept. Then the mother knelt beside him. When her fingers felt her child's cold body and the wound in his side, she screamed and she fell over. And grimly the old rishi performed the last rites for his son. He asked me to gather dry twigs and branches to make a cremation pyre, and he piled them over his dead youth, chanting hymns from the Veda. And at last he offered water to the departed soul, as is the custom for his journey in death, and then he lit that fire with the touch of his hands. And as it blazed up, his wife clutched his hand, and the rishi turned to me. You cannot imagine how I suffer at being parted so brutally from my child. I curse you that in your old age, you will also die of the grief of being separated from your son. And before you die, like us, you will lose the sight of your eyes. And before I could stop them, they walked into the fire and were made ashes with their son. Who else will look after them? So look at the courage. They took their own life. How do we review death? Well, it's commensurate with how we view life. Clinging to it desperately, keeping death in a closet somewhere, ignoring it. But birth is a progression toward death. And if you take the cyclical model, you'll see the prerequisite for birth must be death. So it goes on. And so we have no fear of it because it's an inevitable thing. But the human instinct is at all costs to cling on to life. And people who have a more enlightened outlook will say, no, death being inevitable, we can accept it. Not now, but in its timely course. Right now, we will make sure that we use every drop, every second as an opportunity to do something good for everyone. Everyone includes me. It's an all-inclusive formula. Now, Dasaratha sighed in telling his tale, and Kausalya held his hands tightly in hers, and the tears she shed on to them burned him, and she said, you never told me about this Brahman's curse before. Only now, he says, I thought of it. When we have come across this kind of tragedy, we make a kind of interior self-examination, and now it occurs to him, this is a component. This is cause and effect. This is what we call karma. Only now, he says, I thought of it. And I was as blind as I was when my sight left me, and I was as blind as he was. And Kausalya, hold me and forgive me for everything I've done. My senses grow weak, and I feel as if I'm in a dark cave. That means my own eyesight is going. I will not live long, my queen. The Brahmana's curse will soon be fulfilled. And Rama, I see your face before me, but you are so far away when I need you most. "O Kaikeyi has been the death of me," Kaikeyi, the queen. And he lapsed into incoherence. And Kausalya held him close in the darkness, and Sumitra covered them both with a shawl, and Dasaratha fell into an easy sleep, and only at times he would grow restless and whimper Rama's name. And the sun crept over the rim of the world, and the morning songs and chants went on, and the sounds of it came to Dasaratha's door, and the singers singing his praises, and the women of the palace brought water and unguents for his bath during the early hours. This is palace life. And Kausalya had left her husband in a deep sleep and gone to her own bed for a short time. But the women who slept in the queen's quarters came that morning, as they did every day, to awaken the king. They took off the sheets from his bed and saw them damp with sweat. Dasaratha didn't stir, and his face was set in a serene smile. Growing anxious now, they shook his arms and then his body, but he slept on. And it was the women's screams that woke Kausalya and Sumitra, and they came running, but their husband had left them forever in his sleep, what we call death. A cry went forth through the palace, and soon through all Ayodhya, the king was dead. And just 5 nights he had lived after Rama left. The 6th night had killed him. It was as if he had only waited. That warrior keeping death's messengers at bay in his final battle until Sumitra came and gave him news of Rama. And he had waited in desperate hope that his prince would change his mind and return to him, but that possibility also went. And so he resolved he must depart. Don't forget, he himself predicted to Queen Kaikeyi, I won't live long now. There's no point in my life now. And so now he lay conquered. The conqueror was conquered, but the smile of death's peace curving his lips, and his face was miraculously unwrinkled again. And all the conflict was gone from him. He was now at peace. And Dasaratha, the great Kshatriya military person, the great king, a father to his people, Indra's friend who had fought beside the king of Devaloka, and the one Narayana had chosen to be his own father in the world, was dead because of a woman's weakness. He died of a broken heart. And he died of a broken heart for what he had done to his son, and he lay beyond caring because he felt he could have changed it. And his hands folded across his chest, while his wives and the other women of the palace cried aloud around his bed. The whole issue is bringing up the sensitivity around truth. He himself, committed to truth and truthfulness and fulfilling his promise, had also doubted the validity of truthfulness. And yet, you see, truth alone triumphs. That famous sutra, or famous stotra, which is there, contained in the Mundaka Upanishad, dedicated to renunciation, Satyameva Jayati, truth alone triumphs, that has become the national motto of India. Now, with hollow words of comfort, some of the women led Kausalya away, and she wailed that now both her son and her husband were gone. What had she to live for? She would lie with Dasaratha on his pyre, was her determination. But you see, hollow words of comfort, because in death, no amount of words will assuage the grief, there's no doubt, just on a human level. And if you haven't been through the death, you won't be able to make any comforting words. In fact, most people who haven't been through that process will avoid the bereaved person. But with hollow words of comfort, and the people of Ayodhya were simply stunned. They were dazed. First, Rama had been banished within a very short period of time, 5 days before, 5 nights before, or so, 6 nights, week at the most. And now the king was deaf. And insecurity, not untinged with guilt for having judged Dasaratha harshly in his last days, because the judgment of the citizens was he didn't have to banish the king Rama. He could have changed his mind. but then you see would dishonored truth and truthfulness, where thoughts, words, and deeds have to match up. There's no other way. But they were highly critical. And now you see that was all put away. And it was the old terror of the people who were suddenly without a ruler. This was now the thing. There's nobody now to rule us. Rama is gone. Dasaratha is gone. And of course, the only other person who can take the place is Bharata. But there was a deep suspicion that he was involved in this plot himself. And so, with great, great political turmoil and national turmoil. And so, silence was the sound, if you will, in the streets. No other crowd so vast could have been so quiet. And Dasaratha had been blessed with 4 splendid sons. He had died with none of them at his side. And Vashishta, that great guru and that great minister of the court, looked outside the palace and saw the crowd swollen there on the edge of madness. And they saw the people were so shocked, they did not even cry. And there was no telling what they might do in such a mood. Certainly, because Kaikeya now becomes the enemy, what would they do? Would they lynch the queen? Mob mentality. And certainly Kaikeya's life was in danger, there's no doubt. And Vashishta decided that Bharata, her son, must be sent for at once. Don't forget, he's visiting his grandfather. Until he arrived to perform the last rites for his father, the king's body should be preserved with oils. So it was announced to the people, and like sleepwalkers, they returned to their homes. And there were so many murmurs about Kaikeyi now, but mainly they appeared to be too grief-stricken to think of any violence. Few slept that night. They sat up into the small hours of the morning, speaking of Dasaratha's magnificent reign, and just as they had sat talking about Rama some days ago, and most of them could not even remember a time when King Dasaratha never ruled. Caught between sorrow and panic, the citizens of Ayodhya stayed awake. We get some idea of what's happened in the United Kingdom, that the Queen Elizabeth, who was the only queen anybody ever knew, has now passed away, and a whole national mourning takes place. And so, all night they rode like time, the messengers whom Vashishta had dispatched to Rajagriha, the capital of Kaikeya, where Bharata stayed in his grandfather's palace. They carried this message to the prince: return please at once to Ayodhya. They didn't say why. They couldn't announce this news. It's just that he was required urgently back in Ayodhya. It was a matter of life and death. Please come home. So the messengers bore the customary gifts of silks and jewels that came from one king to another, and stern instructions from the great grandsire Vashishta not to breathe a word of either Rama's exile or Dasaratha's death. With a grandsire, I mean grand guru. And across the river Malini they rode like a gale. They thundered past Hastinapura, crossed the Ganga by dark and turned west, and they left Panchala behind and came to the Ikshumati. They forded her without dismounted and pressed on as if they rode for their whole lives. All night and all day, these people rode without rest, and at dawn they came to Rajagriha, like a storm spent, but bearing the lightning of their message from Ayodhya. And as the messengers rode as if death rode behind them, while Ayodhya stayed awake mourning, Bharata had no idea what was happening. He hadn't the slightest inkling of the momentous events that were happening at home. He wasn't even aware that Rama had been banished. These events happened so quickly, and he was so far away. And so Bharata lay asleep at Rajagriha and was visited by nightmares, such as come to a man but once or twice in his life, and those who do dream interpretation workshop with me will know how dreams are significant. What was his dream? He dreamt that his father was perched on a precipice, that his clothes were soiled and rent, and his hair was flying in an eerie wind. And Bharata watched Dasaratha, his father, fall from that cliff down into a pit of excrement. And then he saw the king again, covered in filth, drinking black oil out of cupped palms. What a terrible dream to have. And his dream then shifted in evil. He saw all the oceans of the earth dried up, and a broken moon fallen to the seabed, where numberless fish lay marooned and gasping. And his dream turned dark again, and in that darkness a great white elephant crashed, trumpeting through a field of cruel spikes planted in the ground, trying blindly to find his way home. The whole dream is worth comprehensive interpretation. Dasaratha reappeared in his son's nightmare. His hair hung to his shoulders, in completely white, and his face was calm and toothless. He rode in a cart pulled by mules and wore a garland of wildflowers around his neck. Bharata awoke with a cry, his bed drenched with the sweat of fear. And Shatrugna was at his side, shaking him. Bharata, wake up, you are having a bad dream. Bharata sat bolt upright in his bed. Don't forget, Bharata and Shatrugna go together. Wherever Bharata goes, Shatrugna goes. And wherever Lakshmana goes, Rama goes. Sorry, wherever Lakshmana goes, Rama goes, yes. And Bharata and Shatrugna, these four pairs, if you will. Anyway, Bharata sits bolt upright in his bed, clutching his brother's hands. His eyes were wild. He panted like a hunted animal. Why should we have these portent dreams with negative portents? Well, because there's only one mind. What do we call cosmic mind? He says, I had such a nightmare, Shatrugna. I saw our father ride in a cart drawn by mules. You know what they say about dreaming of a mule cart? No, we don't, but dream interpretation techniques will tell us. You see, when we dream of animals, according to Jungian psychology anyway, it is of our own emotions and our own fears. Anyway, Shatrugna shook his head, and Bharata's breathing had grown easier now. And he said, that smoke from the pyre of the one riding in the cart will quickly grace the sky. Something terrible has happened in Ayodhya, that much he knew. And I fear for the king and for Rama and Lakshmana, and my body feels as if it's on fire and my eyes burn. Shatrugna, I hate myself strangely and I don't know why. Anyway, the new day was just dawning, and when they heard the sound of horses' hooves in the courtyard below, Bharata jumped up and ran to the window, and he saw his dream had been vindicated. Something was afoot, something negative. And he cried, messages from Ayodhya. The exhausted messengers, don't forget. They went with horses as fast as they could, and we can hardly think that there were reprieves for them. You know, in the days when horses and horse carriages went vast distances, there were teams of horses that relieved them at stopping points, what we call inns. I don't think there was any such system in these days. So the exhausted messengers were received in the palace, and through Bharata they presented the gifts that they had brought. But that prince was impatient to ask, and he said, is my father well? Is he okay? And my brothers and mothers, have you come with bad news? But the leader of the messengers gave a start, but he said with a quick smile, why do you expect bad news, my prince? And all is well in Ayodhya. But your Guru Vashishta sends urgently for you and saying you must return at once, urgently. But Bharata asked, well, but what has happened? We are not at liberty to say. We cannot tell you. But be sure that Devi Lakshmi smiles on you. All good fortune shines on you. Why? Because you're going to be their king. And Bharata turned to Ashwapati, that is his grandfather, and he says, my guru calls me, I must go, but send for me at any time, I will gladly come again. And the old man's face grew sad, and he rose from his throne and embraced Bharata, his grandchild, and says, Kaikeyi, this is your mother, is fortunate to have a son like you, completely unaware of the drama that's unfolded. Bless you, my child. Take my blessings to your mother and your brothers, and my warm greetings to your noble father and your great guru. And then he orders Bharata's chariot to be laden with gifts and a train to follow his grandson to Ayodhya. But Bharata was so preoccupied that he scarcely noticed the elephants and horses. There's a grand royal procession. He doesn't even question why this is so. He scarcely notices it. And all the piles of silks and jewels and so on. And the prince mounted his chariot and cries, okay, fly, chariot driver. My heart is full of fear. And leave the others and fly ahead. And there we'll leave it. And we'll go on to the next chapter concerning Bharata and his reception. But just to say that you have to be aware of the awkward position he's going to be in. Because when he returns to Ayodhya, people are going to suspect that he's power hungry and that he was behind this plot along with his mother. And supposing he accepts this position of king, then what will, supposing people decide to find Rama and rearm him and create a war, it'd be a natural suspicion. The other view would be, we know Bharata, we know his nobility, and we know he's of noble parentage. And will he simply be an interim ruler, or will he actually go and fetch Rama and bring him back, after all the father is gone, bring him back and say, please, you rule. This was all a big mistake. So we'll see what happens in our next story of Rama that will happen next Saturday, all being well. So thank you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swami.